There are paintings that depict death as an ending, a private moment, the silence that follows a single life. And then there are paintings that imagine death on a scale so vast, so merciless, that it seems to swallow the whole human world. The Triumph of Death by Pieter Bruegel the Elder belongs to that second category. It does not show death visiting one king, one soldier, one family, or one battlefield. It shows death everywhere. Death in the fields, death in the roads, death in the sea, death in the homes of the rich and the poor. In this painting, death is not an interruption of life. It is an army, a force, a total conquest. At first glance, the viewer may not even know where to look. The landscape is crowded with horror. Fires burn in the distance. Skeletons march across the land. Human beings flee, fight, pray, collapse, or perish where they stand. Wagons filled with skulls roll forward like supplies for an endless campaign. Coffins, gibbets, bones, and corpses fill the world. There is almost no safe corner, almost no visual refuge, almost no suggestion that anyone will escape. The result is overwhelming. The painting does not present death as a symbol that can be calmly studied. It presents death as catastrophe without boundary. That is one of the reasons the Triumph of Death remains so unforgettable. It is not merely grim. It is relentless. The viewer is not asked to consider mortality in an abstract philosophical sense. The viewer is made to feel what it would mean if all earthly order collapsed at once, if all social rank became meaningless, if violence and inevitability joined hands and swept across civilization itself. This is not death in the distance. It is death victorious. To understand why Bruegel painted such a vision, we need to enter the emotional world of 16th century Europe. This was an age deeply familiar with suffering. War, famine, plague, political unrest, public executions, and religious conflict were not distant historical topics. They were realities that shaped everyday consciousness. Death was present in a way modern people often struggle to imagine. It was seen in streets, homes, churches, battlefields, and burial grounds. It was preached from pulpits, represented in devotional imagery, and woven into the rhythms of life. Human existence felt fragile, not only in theory, but in daily experience. Bruegel lived in the Netherlands during a time of enormous social and political tension. He was one of the greatest painters of his age, known for works that brought together ordinary human life, sharp observation, moral seriousness, and extraordinary visual imagination. He painted peasants, landscapes, proverbs, festivals, disasters, and biblical scenes, with a richness that made the world feel both specific and universal. What makes Bruegel remarkable is that he could portray the smallest details of life, while also suggesting something immense about the human condition. In The Triumph of Death, that gift reaches one of its darkest and most powerful expressions. The painting belongs to a long tradition of European meditation on mortality. Medieval and early modern culture often return to the idea that death comes for everyone. Kings, peasants, lovers, soldiers, clergy, merchants, and beggars all stand equal before the grave. This idea appeared in sermons, poems, funerary art, and visual traditions, such as the Dance of Death, in which skeletons or corpses lead people of every rank toward the inevitable end. But Bruegel does something more terrifying than merely repeating that lesson. He expands it into an apocalyptic panorama. Death does not simply claim individuals one by one. It overruns the world like an invading empire. That sense of invasion is one of the painting's most chilling qualities. The skeletons do not appear as isolated symbols. They behave like an organized military force. They march in formation. They drive people into traps. They ring bells, wield weapons, pull carts, and carry out destruction with grim efficiency. The painting suggests not random misfortune, but systematic conquest. Human society, with all its structures and illusions of control, is being overthrown by an enemy that cannot be bribed, reasoned with, or defeated. And yet the painting is not chaotic in a careless way. Bruegel composes the scene with extraordinary intelligence. The eye moves across a devastated landscape in which every incident contributes to the larger vision. In one area, skeletons drag the living toward a huge coffin like a terrible cage. In another, a king still clutches his wealth, while death approaches. Elsewhere, Lovers remain absorbed in music and intimacy even as doom closes in. Soldiers fall, peasants are slaughtered, clergy are not spared, and even the sea in the distance offers no rescue. Ships burn or drift under a sky that seems emptied of hope. The world itself feels exhausted, scorched, stripped of fertility and mercy. That barren landscape matters deeply. This is not a lush living world briefly interrupted by violence. It is a world already drained, a place where trees are leafless, the ground is dry, and the horizon carries smoke and ruin. Life appears to have been hollowed out before the viewer even begins to trace the countless individual acts of terror. Bruegel does not merely fill the painting with dead bodies, he transforms the whole environment into a theater of desolation. Nature itself seems to have withdrawn. One of the most striking things about the triumph of death is the total collapse of hierarchy. In ordinary life, people rely on rank, wealth, position, or beauty to create a sense of difference and security. Bruegel tears all of that apart. The king is no safer than the commoner. The armored man is no safer than the peasant. The elegant couple is no safer than the poor. Every worldly distinction that humans spend their lives building becomes useless. Death enters all spaces and strips all pretenses away. This is not simply a moral lesson about humility. It is a vision of absolute leveling. But the painting is powerful not only because it shows equality in death. It is powerful because it observes the different ways people respond when confronted with annihilation. Some resist with weapons. Some run. Some hide. Some pray. Some remain distracted by pleasure. Some appear frozen by terror. Bruegel seems fascinated by human denial as much as by human panic, even as doom unfolds everywhere. Not everyone looks fully awake to it. That detail gives the painting psychological depth. It suggests that part of the human condition is the struggle to recognize what is happening before it is too late. This is especially visible in scenes where ordinary pleasures continue in the shadow of destruction. A couple makes music, a meal remains on the table. Precious objects still glitter. These details are not inserted to soften the painting. They make it more disturbing. They show how fragile all comfort is, how easily the routines of joy and refinement can be surrounded by terror. Bruegel does not mock human pleasure, but he does expose its vulnerability. Beauty, love, appetite, and wealth all exist in the painting, yet none can halt the advance of death for even a moment. Another reason the painting feels so overwhelming is that Bruegel gives death a grotesque material presence. These skeletons are not vague spirits. They rattle, march, stab, pull, drag, and carry. Their bodies are bare bone, but their actions are active and purposeful. This makes them more frightening. They are not passive reminders of mortality. They are agents of destruction. They transform the painting into something close to a nightmare military campaign, where the enemy is both absurd and unstoppable. And beneath all of this lies the deepest terror of the painting. The triumph of death is not only about dying, it is about the collapse of meaning when death becomes total. There is no heroic center to the composition, no obvious promise of rescue, no stable moral order visible inside the chaos. Bruegel confronts the viewer with a world in which human power has been humiliated and human certainty has been shattered. The painting does not whisper that life is brief. It roars that no wall, throne, prayer, feast, or sword can hold back the end forever. That is why the painting still grips the modern viewer with such force. It is not merely macabre. It is vast. It takes one of humanity's oldest fears and gives it a world-scale form. It imagines death not as a private fate, but as a conquering force that turns all civilization into a battlefield. What makes the triumph of death so extraordinary is not only its terrifying subject, but the way Bruegel transforms that subject into a total vision of humanity under siege. This is not a painting built around a single dramatic center. There is no one hero, no one decisive battle, no one sacred miracle stopping the disaster. Instead, the entire surface of the painting becomes active at once. Every corner contains another act of terror, another example of human helplessness, another reminder that death is not pausing to choose carefully. It is moving everywhere, against everyone, without fatigue and without mercy. That structure is essential to the painting's emotional power. When a viewer looks at many historical paintings, the eye is guided toward a main event, and the surrounding details support it. Bruegel does something more unsettling. He denies us the comfort of focus. The eye wanders, but it never finds safety. Each new detail only confirms that the devastation is universal. The more we look, the worse it becomes. This is one of the great psychological strategies of the painting. It creates the feeling that the horror is inexhaustible. Among the most memorable details are the scenes that expose the futility of worldly power. A king sits surrounded by treasure, but his gold cannot protect him. This is one of the clearest moral statements in the work. Wealth, which so often creates the illusion of security, becomes meaningless in the face of mortality. The king still appears attached to the material signs of his importance, yet death has already entered his space. His riches do not buy time. They do not buy mercy. They do not even buy dignity. Bruegel shows with brutal clarity that what humans often trust most may be what fails them first. Elsewhere, armed men attempt resistance. They draw swords, raise shields, and struggle against the skeletons. But the effort feels tragic from the start. Human courage is present, yet it is overwhelmed. This is an important nuance. Bruegel does not portray humanity as passive in every case. Some fight, some refuse, surrender. But the painting suggests that bravery alone cannot alter the final outcome. The skeleton army is too vast, too organized, too relentless. The image therefore becomes not only an attack on pride, but a meditation on the limits of force itself. Even violence cannot save the violent. Even soldiers cannot wage war successfully against death. One of the most haunting areas of the painting involves the lovers in the foreground. At first, this scene can seem strangely gentle compared with the surrounding carnage. A man plays music for a woman, and for a brief instant, the world of courtship, pleasure, and elegance appears to persist. Yet this is one of Bruegel's cruelest insights. Even intimacy is not outside the reach of destruction. The lovers seem absorbed in one another while death closes in around them. A skeleton joins the music, turning romance into mockery. The moment is unforgettable because it reveals how fragile beauty is. Song, charm, and desire continue, but they do so on the edge of annihilation. This is not simply satire. Bruegel is not only laughing at human foolishness, he's showing something deeper about denial. Human beings continue to eat, love, sing, count money, pray, flirt, and make plans, even in a world shadowed by mortality. That continuation is part of life's dignity, but it is also part of life's blindness. In the triumph of death, those ordinary attachments become painfully exposed. They are meaningful, but they are not protective. They may comfort for a moment, yet they cannot alter the larger truth advancing across the land. The religious dimension of the painting is also complex. In a work like this, one might expect a strong visual sign of salvation or divine rescue, but Bruegel withholds easy reassurance. Clergy appear vulnerable like everyone else. Prayer does not visibly stop the march of death. Crosses, rituals, and holy status do not function as shields within the scene. That does not necessarily mean the painting is denying faith. Rather, it places the viewer in a world where earthly experience is dominated by terror, judgment, and uncertainty. The silence of rescue becomes part of the painting's emotional weight. This silence may reflect the spiritual intensity of the period in which Bruegel lived. 16th century Europe was not only shaped by disease and war, but by profound religious tension. Questions of sin, judgment, salvation, and the end of earthly life were not abstract topics for intellectual debate alone. They formed part of daily consciousness. In such a world, death was not merely biological. It carried spiritual dread. The terror in Bruegel's painting comes partly from that background. The viewer is not only confronted with corpses and skeletons, but with the possibility that the whole human order is being measured and found fragile. Another reason the painting remains so powerful is that Bruegel balances horror with observation. For all its apocalyptic scale, the work is full of specific human reactions. Some figures resist, some plead, some seem stunned, some appear not to understand what is happening until it is too late. This variety matters because it prevents the painting from becoming abstract allegory. We do not see humanity in general as a single mass. We see individuals and types caught in different emotional states. That makes the vision more convincing and more painful. The apocalypse becomes human in the smallest gestures. Bruegel also uses objects brilliantly. Bells ring, carts roll, weapons flash, Tables remain set. Instruments keep playing. Coins spill. Cups lie abandoned, and traps close around the living. These objects remind us that civilization is made not only of people, but of habits, systems, possessions, and routines. Death in this painting conquers all of that as well. It enters not just bodies, but structures. It overturns not just lives, but worlds. The result is that the painting feels larger than a massacre. It feels like the destruction of human order itself. The sea in the distance strengthens that idea. Normally, water can suggest trade, movement, escape, or the continuation of life beyond the immediate scene. Here, there is no such comfort. Ships appear threatened, burning, or useless. Even the far horizon offers no alternative. This is crucial because it prevents the eye from imagining a safe beyond. Bruegel closes every route. The land is overrun, the cities burn, the roads are deadly, and the sea does not save. The world feels sealed. The color palette contributes to this atmosphere of exhaustion and doom. Bruegel does not rely on rich abundance or bright optimism. The tones are dry, dusty, smoky, and blood-touched. Reds appear not as celebratory warmth, but as flame, cloth, blood, and warning. Earth colors dominate, making the landscape seem starved and spent. This palette gives the painting its scorched, emotional climate. The world does not merely contain deaths. It looks as though it has already been partly consumed by it. And yet the painting is not empty nihilism. It has moral force because it exposes illusion. It strips away the false securities people cling to and reveals what remains. Rank fails. Wealth fails. Strength fails. Pleasure fails. Even social role fails. In that exposure, there is something severe but truthful. Bruegel is not creating horror for spectacle alone. He is forcing the viewer to see that mortality is the one conqueror before whom all earthly arrogance collapses. That is why the triumph of death feels greater than a grim fantasy. It becomes a panoramic meditation on human vulnerability. It shows a civilization crowded with activity, desire, and hierarchy, and then shows how quickly those things can be overturned when the final force arrives. Bruegel paints death not only as destruction, but as revelation. Under its pressure, people are shown for what they are, what they fear, and what they trusted too much. The lasting power of the triumph of death comes from the fact that it never feels limited to its own century. It was born from the fears, tensions, and religious imagination of 16th century Europe, but it continues to disturb viewers because its central truth remains recognizable. Human beings still build their lives as if order will hold, as if wealth will protect, as if power will endure, as if daily routine can keep dread at a distance. Bruegel's painting tears through all of those assumptions. It shows a world where every human arrangement has been exposed as temporary, and that is why the image does not stay in the past. It keeps returning to the present. One of the most remarkable things about the painting is that it speaks on several levels at once. It can be seen as a religious warning about mortality and judgment. It can be seen as a social vision in which all ranks are leveled. It can be seen as a psychological study of denial, panic, and helplessness. It can even be seen as a political image, shaped by an age of war and violence in which large populations lived under the shadow of catastrophe. None of these readings cancel the others. In fact, they strengthen one another. The painting becomes more powerful because it does not reduce death to one meaning. It presents death as biological fact, spiritual terror, social equalizer, and civilizational destroyer all at once. This is why modern viewers often find the painting strangely familiar, even if they know little about the 16th century. The details may belong to another age, but the emotional structure does not. Fear of collapse, fear of disorder, fear that the systems around us are more fragile than they seem. These are not foreign ideas. Bruegel captures something permanent in the human imagination. The sense that beneath all confidence there is vulnerability, beneath all celebration there is an ending, beneath all structure there is uncertainty. The triumph of death gives that fear a form so vast and concrete that it becomes impossible to ignore. And yet the painting is not memorable only because it is frightening. It is memorable because it is intelligent. Bruegel does not simply pile horror upon horror for effect. He organizes the horror to reveal a truth about the world. Every class is represented. Every human strategy is tested. Every form of attachment is touched. Kings, peasants, clergy, lovers, soldiers, musicians, and merchants all appear in the same doomed landscape. This universality is what turns the painting into more than a nightmare. It becomes a theory of mortality in visual form. No one is outside the frame of its meaning. There is also something important about the way Bruegel refuses to isolate evil in a single villain. There is no tyrant at the center, causing all this devastation. There is no one monstrous figure who can be blamed and then removed. Death itself is the conquering force, and that changes the moral atmosphere of the world. In many images of violence, the viewer can reassure themselves by locating the problem in one enemy. Here that comfort disappears. The threat is not merely political, not merely criminal, not merely personal. It is woven into the condition of life that makes the painting more terrifying, but also more profound. It pushes the viewer beyond simple condemnation into existential recognition. At the same time, Bruegel's skeletons are so active, so organized, and so grotesquely human in their behavior that they almost seem to parody human society. They use carts, weapons, bells, traps, and formations. They mirror the structures of the living while destroying them. This gives the painting a bitter irony. Death conquers the world by behaving like a world. It has its own order, its own campaign, its own grim administration. That is part of what makes the image unforgettable. The conqueror is not only unstoppable, it is methodical. Many viewers also remember the painting because of how densely it rewards attention. It is one of those works that changes the longer you look. At first, the overall devastation overwhelms. Then individual scenes begin to emerge. The king with his treasure, the lovers with their music, the wagon of skulls, the giant coffin trap, the burning background, the bodies on the ground, the skeleton playing an instrument as if death itself were mocking human pleasure. With each new discovery, the painting becomes richer and harsher. It does not release the viewer. It draws them deeper into its logic. That density is one reason it remains so endlessly discussable. There is always another detail, another symbol, another emotional turn. The work also matters because it belongs to Bruegel's larger genius for making moral vision concrete. He was not a painter who preached through simple symbols alone. He understood that people grasp truth most deeply when it takes visible shape in the world. In the triumph of death, mortality is not represented by one skull on a table or one solemn funeral scene. It becomes a total environment. The landscape itself teaches the lesson. The lesson is not stated. It is experienced. That is a far more powerful kind of art. For modern audiences, the painting often resonates not only as a meditation on individual death, but on collective catastrophe. Its scorched earth, burning horizons, mass panic, and collapse of order can call to mind war, plague, famine, and social ruin far beyond Bruegel's own time. This is another reason it endures. It speaks not just to the fear that each person dies, but to the fear that entire worlds can fall apart. In that sense, it feels hauntingly modern. It understands that death is not only personal, it can also be historical. And still, for all its brutality, the painting contains a strange kind of clarity. It strips away illusion. It reveals how thin human control can be. That revelation is terrifying, but it is also honest. Bruegel forces the viewer to confront what most people prefer to keep at the edge of consciousness. Life is fragile. Rank is temporary. Possession is unstable. Pleasure is vulnerable. No worldly structure is final. The painting does not allow those truths to remain gentle. It makes them thunder across the land. That is why The Triumph of Death remains one of the greatest and most disturbing paintings ever made. Not because it is simply dark, not because it shocks, but because it achieves something rare. It takes one of humanity's oldest certainties and imagines it on a scale so complete that the viewer feels civilization itself trembling. It transforms mortality into invasion, judgment, theater, and revelation, all at once. And once you have really seen it, the image is very hard to forget. The skeleton army keeps moving in the mind. The burning horizon stays lit. The king still clutches his treasure. The lovers still play their music while doom approaches. The trap still closes. The world still dries into ruin. Bruegel creates not just a painting, but a vision that lingers like a warning. That is the final achievement of The Triumph of Death. It does not merely show that people die. It shows what human life looks like when death is imagined as the one conqueror before whom every illusion collapses. It turns mortality into a world-sized drama and forces the viewer to stand inside it.